This is the meeting of the Metro Arts Commission Grants and Funding Committee. It's June 16th. I'm going to call this meeting to order right now. But first, actually, I'm going to read this statement. Pursuant to the provisions of, one second. I'm just going to get my glasses because I brought them. I have two different sets for this very purpose. And thank you for your patience. Okay. Pursuant to the provisions of 2.68030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, please take notice that the decisions of the Arts Commission may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law writ of certiorari. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the Commission. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure time and procedural requirements are met. With that, I will call the meeting to order. And could we just do a roll call? Vivian, do you mind?
I don't mind at all.
Thank you.
All right. Commissioner Lefkowitz,
Here.
Commissioner Jester,
Here.
Commissioner Khalil,
Here.
Director Batchelder,
Here.
Ms. Capri Harston,
Here.
Macy Amos,
Here.
and myself, Vivian Fox, are all here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Macy, thank you for joining us today. Okay, so public comment. Did we receive any online public comment, Vivian?
No, we have not received any online public comment, and we do not have any in-person comment today.
Great. Okay, so thank you. So no public comment today. The first agenda item is agenda item C, the approval of the minutes from May 19th, which you have before you. And thank you for preparing these. So I'll let you, hopefully you received these in your packet that Vivian sent. And thank you, Vivian, for that. So I will let you look at this, and I'll consider a motion when you have one.
I guess I went straight to the part of the conversation that I knew I had more to do in, and it seems like there was more conversation than just FY26 pause on murals public art eligibility due to limited capacity and project requirements. So I'm just wondering how much of the conversation we need to have in there versus just sort of a recap.
So we're working to just make the minutes very concise, and knowing that people can go back in all of these meetings, especially since all the meetings are being recorded. So I guess that's what we're trying to do with our minutes now.
Yeah, and that was the rationale of just the statements of the conversations that were had. If we start to add more, at what point? I don't know if you have any best practices. Okay. If you wish to see more, you can let us know.
No, I just wasn't sure. So I'll move to approve.
Second.
All in favor of approving the minutes?
Yes.
Yes. I opposed, abstaining. Thank you so much. Minutes are approved. We'll move to D, discussion action items, and wondering, Interim Director Batchelder, would you be able to provide an update on fiscal year 25?
Yeah, so FY25 is, of course, the fiscal year that we're currently living in. And so you have on the page in front of you the typical status table update that we share every month. Just, it doesn't look too different from last month. So the update on contracts is that of our 165 grantees, it is just one contract that we have not executed. And so all 164 other ones are fully executed. When we talk about payments, the numbers are the same. We have paid 164 of our 165 grantees, and so the one that we have not paid is the one that does not have an executed contract. And so we have resolved the sort of ones that had gotten stuck in that payment and approval process from last month. And then the new row that I put here is that on June the 4th, we sent out the closeout reports to all Thrive and operating grantees. That is the reporting that is due on July the 15th of this or of next month. We kept the reporting very similar to last year, so to not make a lot of changes under this abbreviated, confusing year that we've had in this last year. So we kept the reporting the same, just updating, basic things that needed to be updated. So the reporting includes a expenditures form. So I'm sort of, if you're not familiar with what our closeout includes, I want you to be familiar, so I'm going to tell you. It includes an expenditure form, so it's just basically, here are the categories of allowed expenses, what did you spend your grant on? It is self-reported information, so when we get that back, we're of course making sure that it matches the total grant amount and that it mirrors the budget that was submitted with the contract. And then there's a short narrative section so that people can provide some narrative behind the numbers that they report on. And then we have some questions around like success stories that came from the fund, what was accomplished with it toward the goals that were originally laid out. We asked for some photos. We asked some questions around the number of people engaged through the programming or organizational work. We ask if the funding generated or supported any jobs, and if so, to report on those numbers. And we ask for feedback if anyone wants to give us feedback as well. So that's the gist of the closeout, and it is again similar or quite the same as the previous year. So that's where we are right now. And so again, the spending period for this cycle ends on June the 30th of this month. And then the closeout forms or closeout reports are due July the 15th. And that is all done through the submittable platform where the applications live.
Great. Any questions from committee members about closeout? Excellent. Let's move into FY26 updates, and we'll do the updates before we do the timeline review, per our kind of usual practice of looking at the timeline, just to keep it in front of us. So we have two main actions today. The purpose here is to provide recommendations that we would take to the commission to vote on next week, right? So the first action item we have is around operating guidelines, review, and recommendations. Ashley, do you want to take us through those? So just to be clear, these are the review of the guidelines that will go to the commission next week.
So I thought that what we could do is just kind of walk through the guidelines that you have in front of you. And I think for anybody viewing here in the audience or online at home, Vivian will have things shown on her screen as well. And so we can take operating up first, and I'll start by sort of saying things that you've heard me say in previous meetings as well, but we didn't do a lot of major changes this year. Primarily because we wanted to get the cycle going instead of taking greater time on the period right now to make a lot of changes, and to do that in a thorough way would take a little bit more time than we thought was available to us. And so these look very familiar to the last year. We've done some reorganization of information within them and some added just some clarity in language where some clarity was needed, but there's not a whole lot of structural changes in here. So with that said, we'll start with operating. On the front page, it's just general information. Right now we are proposing that the applications will be due at 11:59 p.m. on August the 15th. That, of course, assumes that everything, the approval process moves on as we've been planning. So both approval with the commission next week and then approval with the Metro Council. If either of those things get delayed, then the application window will, of course, be adjusted to as such. Page 2 is our information that we have on all of our applications about non-discrimination policies, ADA compliance and accessibility. No changes there. Page 3 is just the information about Metro Arts. No changes there. We did not change the criteria for operating organizations, which is what is shown at the bottom of page 3. And onto page 4, the only updates here are things where we've had to change dates. So, for example, organizations must submit their IRS letter of determination, and our criteria is that an organization must be in existence for 1 year, and so we've updated the date on what that determination letter is. So those kind of changes are the only changes we've made through here on criteria. We have not changed the eligibility expenses on operating grants, and so those are the same as they have always been, as shown on the bottom of page 4. If we flip over to page 5, this is where I have my first sort of highlighted note. So let me tell you what that is about. This is a placeholder for myself with some new information that I just got today. And so this is on grant cycle time frame. What I wasn't sure about was when the start period for the contract would begin, but our start dates for contracts are the date that they are signed by all parties. So that language will be adjusted to say that this contract goes into effect on the date that the contract is fully executed. And so that date will be different for different grantees. And so the way that we did it this year was a little unusual, but that is the way that we will do that. So I'm going to write myself, or can you write a note for that? Yeah. So that language will be adjusted, that the contract goes into effect when signed by all parties. The next section is matching funds. Metro Arts does not require grantees to show matching funds when applying for a grant. We are not changing that this year. The next section, grant categories. We are not changing the grant categories that categorize organizations based on budget size. These budget sizes are the same as they were before. I just made adjustments so that $100,000 was not included in two different categories, right? So you see the tweak in the language there and just streamlining of some of that language, but substantively that is the same information and criteria that we have this year. Award amounts, as described, is not changing the calculation of how we've awarded grants from this year. The edits that I did there was just for clarity in the language and how things are communicated and described. And I, on page 6, again, put an asterisk here that all awards, including minimum award amounts, are subject to being scaled based on the available budget. So that's what we did this year. And so this is just, again, saying that that awards are subject to scale. Size category transition. This is new this year. We talked about this at our last meeting. This is for those organizations that are just over a threshold that we identify of transitioning up a size category. So for a small organization that's becoming a medium organization, or a mid-size organization that is just over the threshold of a large organization, what we brought to you last time and what we've put into the guidelines here says that if you are 10% over that upper threshold, then the size, the award size will be calculated as the midpoint percentage between those two categories. So, for example, if an organization's revenue is $105,000, which is 5% over that threshold, then the award will be calculated as 37.5% of the revenue. That's the midpoint between what it would be if you're small and what it would be if you are medium. So that is a new thing. So this is addressing those organizations that, we're just over the threshold that showed some of our data anomalies when we looked at the awards visually. The next section is about submittable. We've added just some language here again because we know that we had some technical difficulties with submittable this year, that specific questions for the platform should be submitted to submittable IT help. And I will say the IT help at submittable is responsive. I know a lot of us have used it before, and so just sort of emphasizing that we cannot control every aspect of submittable, and it is not a Metro platform. The deadline, again, already stated what we are anticipating that to be. The checklist is the same. When we go over to the top of page 7, this is important dates. We have the application period, the technical review period, the panel review period. We have our anticipated commission approval on September the 25th. We let applicants know that we would anticipate making award notifications September 26th through the 29th. And then going into contract and payment processes, which really shows what we've showed on our internal timeline planning here, that we would expect funding to go out the door in November of this year. So before the end of the calendar year has always been our goal. This puts the final spend date on June 30th. So that's the end of the next fiscal year, and closeout due on July 15th. So those are the same days that we used this year, just applied for next year. For this funding determinations section here, what we've added here is language about the 3-day correction period. And so we talked about this in our discussion last month. We wanted to build something in so that applicants would not be rejected for a fixable error. This could be something like a missing form, or maybe like a keystroke error that made their timeline incorrect, or maybe one thing in the proposed budget is not actually an allowable cost, but this 3-day correction period would happen after the technical reviews are done, and applicants would have an opportunity to correct those things within the short 3-day window. So again, this is just really about preventing preventable denials. The scoring and funding formula is the same in these guidelines. And so this is applicants who score 70 or above will be awarded a grant based on the formula. This is the same as last year. And again, this method of scoring, we can think about it as like a pass-fail method. If you score above 70, you pass, you become eligible for a grant. This was one of the things that really was about making these awards more accessible and making them more accessible. Let's see. Funding approval, that is just, we clarified some of the language, making it more concise around the approval process after the scoring. This is where we note our conflicts of interest policy, award notification, pretty standard information there. Grant payment schedule, again, this is the same type of information. Talks about the contracts having to be signed by multiple parties within Metro, and that whole process can take 4 to 6 weeks. We have the midpoint check-in short section on page 8. This is something that we are developing plans for the next cycle. I think for lots of different reasons. One of them being the very short timeline that the grant period had ended up being for this year. We didn't do a lot of checking in with our grantees, and so this is an opportunity just to be more connected with the folks whose work Metro Arts is supporting. As well as making sure that, people feel supported, have their questions answered, making sure that we can also help have an understanding about all the good work that is being done with the Metro Arts funding there. And so we'll be working on developing out what this process is, who will have these check-ins, what will they look like, and how we communicate that clearly before and after the fact and such there. And then final closeout is the last section here. This is really no changes from the current year, except for, again, updating what those dates are. And this doesn't say exactly what that closeout reporting will look like. So I do anticipate we'll be looking at the reporting and just thinking about how can we also use reporting for a strategic purposes of advocating for the arts in Nashville, right? Not making it so burdensome, but making sure that we are thinking strategically about what we're asking for in our reporting. Logo use, maintaining good standing, monitoring, all on page 9 is the same language that we've used in our current guidelines. And again, this includes the note that Metro Arts may monitor up to 10% of our operating grants annually. And so if selected, all of that process would be clearly defined and communicated, and some of the things that may be asked for in that process are listed here on the page there.
Just out of curiosity, what happens if someone does not use the logo or follow our logo usage and credit policy?
So it could be something that could affect their good standing category here. And so, let's see, an organization's subsequent grant application could be denied eligibility if those requirements are not met. I think we would have a conversation around, is that something that can be corrected if we were to see that.
Thank you.
When we look at the scoring rubric on page 10 and 11, we made a couple changes here. So those changes are two things. The the rubric from last year allowed micro-organizations to choose, do I want to answer just one question or do I want to answer 4 questions? And so on the scoring side, that resulted in the same category of organizations having different information. And so we've eliminated that choice of which question do you want to answer. And so micro, small, and medium all answer questions 1 through 5. Instead of micro choosing if they want to just answer one question. And then mid-size and large organizations answer questions 1 through 7. And so that is the same as last year of the largest organizations answering 2 additional questions. One addition that we put here is number 8. So it says for first-time applicants or organizations that have never received a Metro Arts operating support grant, is there anything else that you would like to be known about your work or organization? And so that will, on the application, it'll have a question of, have you ever applied? Is this your first time applying? And or it's what it says. Have you not received a Metro Arts operating grant support? So that question will become available if somebody answers affirmatively to that question. So those are the proposed operating guidelines. And so the edits, everything in here is for discussion amongst you all, of course, but the change for sure that I know I will do is that clarification around contracts will begin once signed by all parties. The other thing that I realize I did not explicitly comment on is on page 5, so about award amounts. And so, as you know, we are recommending the same funding formula where we will scale the award to the available budget that we have. And we don't need to decide right now what those allocations are to the size categories. But what I mean by that is, this is all hypothetical, right? We could allocate that medium organizations will receive 20% of the overall operating funding or 22% of the overall operating funding. But that would come when we're doing allocations. So that's not specifically written out in the guidelines. And part of it is because we don't know, we don't have applications yet, right? So we can't predict what we don't know. So the guidelines are written to take that into account.
Thank you for all of this. And I just want to clarify, too, that these guidelines, you worked with Tessa and legal, right? So these guidelines have already been reviewed and have received comment from legal. Is that right? That's correct. Great. Thank you. Any discussion, questions, clarifications? I know you said this would be discussed, but I just want to clarify, when we're looking at the midpoint check-in, would the goal be for everyone to receive a check-in? Would that be potentially selective? I am appreciative of the fact that it can be framed as kind of supportive, especially maybe of a new organization, just checking in with them, making sure that they don't need any extra support. Any thoughts about that? Or, yeah.
Yeah, my thoughts or others' thoughts. We don't include the specific process here. I think, again, when we see who our grantees are, we could think about some of those criteria, like you said, first-time grantee, or that's the most obvious one that comes to mind, right? But, overwhelmingly, I think people want to talk about their work and want their work to be seen, and especially, thinking about we have a PIO position that'll be coming on board soon, and like we'll be able to, I think, do a lot more like visits with grantees. I shouldn't make any promises, but you know, those are a lot of the things that we want to do, right? And given the challenges that we've been working our way through, we haven't done a lot of that in the last year, and so I think we will certainly be bringing those plans for how we plan to do that, but we don't need the specifics of it laid out in the guidelines. But we will absolutely make sure that you know how we're going about doing that and what those numbers are, and you know, what are our goals and objectives of those beyond what it says right here, right? Which our stated goal and objective is that these are to make sure that the work is progressing well and confirms that funds are being used in alignment with the grant's objectives, right?
Yeah, I do think it's a great opportunity to just do that kind of engagement, right? And collect, just know and more information about what people are doing that we can talk about more. So I'm very supportive of that. Any other questions? I want to thank Ashley and the staff for working on these. As someone who worked on these guidelines and criteria for the last session, it's not easy to get them and to get them together. So these look to me in great shape, I would say, in terms of consistency and thoughtfulness. So, yeah, questions?
I have one question about the grant cycle timeframe. The contract will go into effect at this when all parties have signed, which then means the midpoint would be a different time for the organizations, would mean that might there be some kind of, you must get this signed by, it must be signed by a certain date, while we're not giving that as November 1st. It changes, it seems it would change the timeline for everybody on this side of the grant and on those doing the grant and what's happening. So I have a concern that not having a hard and fast deadline when everyone has to have all parties signed will throw things off for everybody.
Yeah, so the other sort of option of approaching this is exactly what you just said, and this is like what I talked through with Tessa, where I could select a date. It could be November 1st, where if your contract's not signed by then it's too late. I think that's an option. And so just based on the experience that we've had right now, like we know that some people sign the contracts the day they come in, right? Especially if it's like an organization that has a staff person that's sitting on their computer on email every day. We know that some folks, for fair reasons, just don't respond as promptly, right? And so I hear you, and I was sort of the reason why I went that way was because I'm wary about picking a specific date because it's hard to predict when every contract will be signed by as well. And knowing that even if somebody doesn't sign their contract for 2 weeks, we still will do whatever it takes to get in contact with them, especially at smaller organizations where it's like maybe not a staff member doing that, or if in this cycle we're probably less likely to have like changing roles like we had this year because of the delay, so that's probably like less of a concern that we have, that the person who submitted the application might not be the person, the main contact. So that's kind of the thought behind that, and I think when we think about like midpoint. Like we could think about like a full month being a midpoint. Whether like a midpoint check-in could be at the beginning of the month or the end of the month, but just sort of a general approach to that. So that's just kind of like my thought process behind your question, but.
And that makes sense. I'm one who works on deadlines, so I really like having an endpoint. So that's just where my frame goes for thinking about how the process would work. So thank you.
I will certainly ask for things by a certain date, but we're able to have some flexibility after that. So I don't want to like be firm when I don't need to be, if it means that somebody might have, if somebody's had an emergency and maybe missed it, right?
Other questions, thoughts, comments? Commissioner Chester?
Not a question so much as I was thinking that I don't know that this is an issue, but if you could just recall it a grant check-in instead of a midpoint check-in, so it doesn't differentiate a specific time versus just, because if we did have a specific date and it was one date that all the grants needed to be checked up on, that would be very constraining to Metro Arts staff as well, so, yeah.
I'm fine with grant check-in. Accomplish the same purpose, so.
Yeah, just less ambiguity around a certain date, and it could be anytime it's feasible or easy for Metro Arts staff to do the check-in.
I have noted that. And the other thing I'll say, the action that I will ask you all to consider is if you want to recommend these guidelines with the edits as such and such for the commission next week. If you are at home later and you notice something else, like we can still talk about that next week. So this is in the commission meeting, correct?
Yeah, we're just providing a recommendation next week and saying that we've had discussion, we've reviewed them, and then they go on, but we certainly can make any additional changes next week as well. So, yes.
I'll make a motion to recommend the operating support and grant criteria guidelines with the one edit around midpoint to the full commission next week.
And correcting the language.
Correcting the language correcting the language around the time frame. Mm-hmm. Do I have a second?
Second. Did we have to restate that? I didn't second. Did we need to restate it?
Do we need to
from the
restate
beginning?
it?
Are we good?
So your motion might be to recommend the guidelines with the full commission with edits, including adding clarifying language about the beginning of the contract and changing midpoint check-in to grant check-in.
Yes. That is my motion.
Did we do that right?
It was close.
And that is my second.
All in favor? Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Passes. Thank you so much for that. I feel like we have something good to take next week. We'll move now to agenda item B, which is Thrive Guidelines Review and Recommendations. So you have that before you as well. Ashley, do you want to take us through the main things here that we need to look at?
So you have the Thrive packet in front of you. Pages 1, 2, 3 is the same information that we reviewed before with operating. When we get to page 4, this lists a description of the goals and intent of Thrive community-based art projects. This is where it says successful projects align with Metro Arts mission and Thrive goals and objectives by impacting neighborhoods and communities, actively engaging residents, et cetera, as laid out in the bullet points there. This is really just some sort of language clarification, reordering of information that had lived in other places to make this all upfront. This is where we put that Thrive project proposals, maybe for up to $15,000 this year. So last meeting we talked about the maximum requests being $15,000 for this cycle. This is the same 3 ways that applicants may submit their application: written, audio, or video. What is different here is that we removed the Thrive Public Art projects. So this was the conversation, the discussion that we had last month about things like murals or sculptures or other things that would be in that category, architectural landscape. And it is the staff's recommendation, or the staff recommendation, that we remove that for this year. We don't have a clear process for how we have evaluated the mural applications, and without having that clear process in place, it has led to some issues that were troubleshooting on the back end that weren't anticipated on the front end. And so that is why you see that removed right here. Happy to talk about that more either now or I'll keep going. I will keep going for now. The additional requirements are, again, just kind of language cleanup or making things more concise. From last year's guidelines, this is where we just add more clarity around the background check requirement as well. I think I skipped over this in operating, but the language is the same in operating, that we do have a background check requirement for projects that directly engage youth, and that applicants will be asked to fill out that attestation form. So that's the same process that we used, or that we implemented mid-cycle this year. We are now implementing it at the beginning, so it'll be a lot less confusing. When we go on to page 5, eligibility for Thrive project funding, these are the same 3 groups that were listed as eligible in the current guidelines. So individual artists, artists collectives or artist teams, and nonprofit organizations. So there's no changes there. Some of the specific language might be a little bit different, but no substantive changes there. We have something that I've highlighted here at the bottom of page 5. So this is in the section that individuals or entities that cannot receive a Thrive grant include. These are the same things as in the current cycle. So this is employees, elected officials, colleges and universities. But we have a note, or what I've highlighted here is, this says members of the Arts Commission, Public Art Committee, or Care Committee are not eligible to receive a Thrive grant. So let me say, I am proposing that that is not included in the grant guidelines. In reviewing the guidelines, we were seeing that we had excluded PAC from being eligible to apply for grants, and the same reasoning should be applied to CARE. I am suggesting that this highlighted sentence here is just struck out. It makes it sound like I've just said that we are not allowing this, while I'm saying we are allowing it. I don't need to do that. Basically, we have to have guidelines in place that community members who serve on our committees, be it CARE or PAC, are not actively involved in reviewing the grants or making recommendations on grants. So because that is a conflict of interest situation, and we haven't brought the grants to the CARE committee this current cycle, or somebody would have to fact check me if they were brought in the previous cycle. That would be the 24 cycle. But we are, again, not bringing grants to the CARE or PAC committee right now, because that would disallow those committee members from being paid through grants or applying as grants. So my recommendation is to remove this highlighted sentence that says committee members are not eligible to apply for grants. Did I explain that clearly? Because I feel like I did a confusing job on that.
No, I think that makes sense. We're just trying to, like, the language, it could be that the language just wasn't changed after we just added community members to care. But we certainly don't want, my opinion is that these committee members should be able to apply for this funding. So striking this, and then striking this would and make sense to me.
Yes. So I've made it sound like it's a problem, but the solution is just to remove that and for, yes. So that will be as such. So just for anybody who did not follow my rambly thing there, if community members are serving on the CARE committee or the PAC committee, you are allowed to apply for grants. You will just not be in a position in your official capacity to review grants, give recommendations. People can do whatever you want in your private capacity, but there's not a formal role in those committee roles for reviewing and advising on grants. Is that more clear? Okay. At the bottom of page 5, this is some language that I made a little bit more concise as well. It says only one Thrive submission per applicant. Multiple Thrive submissions from the same applicant will not be accepted. And then if we flip over to page 6, this is where we have some color-coded options. These are some of the things that we left a little undecided, last month in our conversation. Or let me just finish the sentence that I was saying there. If it is determined that an applicant might have submitted 2 applications, they will be contacted to ask which one they want withdrawn. So it's not an automatic disqualification. So where you have at the top of page 6, on this, the top there, this is addressing the question of micro and small organizations being eligible to apply for operating grants and Thrive grants. And so this is what has gone back and forth the last 2 grant cycles. We talked about this some last month. This year we have an opportunity to be clear about it and to not change that, right? And so option 1 is that organizations cannot receive a Thrive and operating support grant in the same grant cycle. Organizations may only receive 1 grant from Metro Arts in any given cycle and should only apply for 1 grant. Contact Metro Arts if you need assistance determining which grant is most appropriate for your organization. So that gives, the sort of autonomy for our smaller organizations to decide if they want to apply for operating support or for project support. We know that is the decision that some groups made this year. And so that is, as written, not prescribing, say, a micro-organization from only being eligible for operating. If a micro-organization wants to apply for project support, then as this is written, this would allow them to apply for Thrive and to not apply for operating. Or option 2 says organizations that are eligible in the micro or small category for Metro Arts operating support grants may also apply for Thrive grants in the same cycle. This has caused some confusion in the last 2 cycles. So these are the 2 decisions that we can make.
To clarify, option 1 was the policy for the last year, correct? I mean, a little bit different, but more or less the what happened last in FY25. Option 2 was that the policy before 25?
Option 2 was what was written at the beginning of the guidelines the last 2 years, and option 1 is what was decided as awards were awarded in the last 2 years.
What has community feedback been around this specific topic?
It has been some of both. I mean, to be honest, I think that the other thing to consider is that based on last year, the resources devoted to Thrive are larger than they had been in previous years, right? So Thrive is about access to artists, individual artist funding, and that still remains, right? That is unchanged. When the increase to Thrive occurred, and more projects are being funded through Thrive, and the allocation is higher to Thrive, that was when it was being thought that, well, maybe our smallest organizations, which are really like a group of a couple individual artists who, formed a organization but probably don't have any staff, is a volunteer-run organization, is, a group of individual artists. That is when it was, noted that these organizations need project funds in addition to operating funds. And, it historically at Metro Arts, we used to require 3 years of nonprofit status before you could apply for an operating grant. So those organizations had typically only had Thrive available to them until you were an organization for 3 years, right? So that changed 2 years ago. So all of that to say, it is not unusual for our small organizations to apply for Thrive, which again, the objective and the goals of Thrive are impacting neighborhoods and communities, actively engaging residents in project planning, decision-making, art-making, etc. The other thing I think is that we are able to create our funding models to support our small organizations in whatever way you decide to, right? So part of what made this confusing on the organization side is that operating support grants on the smallest end were $900, $992 for a micro organization. And so an organization might see Thrive as being more beneficial to their work. So both of these options allow the organization to make that choice. And I think that we can determine through the policy that we set that organization grants could end up being larger for those small organizations. So they're not in this weird position of wondering which one might be best for them to apply to. And so, I feel, given that, I feel comfortable saying that I think option 1 is an appropriate choice, which is, we'll work with organizations to determine if Thrive or operating is the best fit for them. And we can make sure that we have intention behind our operating funding formula so that some of the organizations don't end up having extremely small grants, putting them in that confusion situation.
Other conversation about that? I had mentioned in our discussion last time too that I was more in favor of what we would call option 2 here, just because I felt like it allowed artists within really small and micro organizations to seed these community-based projects, right, while still having access to operating funds so that they could pay themselves. I do agree that thinking about the allocations or providing more operating funding potentially to these organizations, small and micro, might, in essence, just give them more funds to think about how they wanted to allocate. And I am supportive of both of these, the organization making the choice, right, of what is best for them. Other comments or thoughts from committee members? Do you have?
Well, I would say that I'm in support of option one, given the recommendations that are being proposed for the changing in the allocation of funding so that our microorganizations can have increased dollars through the program. I think that will level things out in terms of, being in favor of option one, because if we reallocate how we're awarding the funding through those percentages that were recommended, then the smaller organizations would receive increased funding through that. And logistically, in terms of operations and support of the programs, having that clear delineation of, what is operating, what is thrived, what does it do, it allows us to not blur the lines, and then our communities can become familiar with what grant fits them best moving forward once they've learned, which grant is which. So I would support option one.
And so, whatever we want will be part of a full motion with edits as such. I also, again, we had a short runway to develop these recommendations right now. I think that there are lots of ideas that people had around improvements, or is improvements the right word? Potential changes to the Thrive grant, because now the bounds of it are a little different than what it was before, with it being a grant, right? Where it could have different categories in a time where we have a larger or longer runway to plan that all out, right? And so, I think that option one is the most straightforward, and just thinking about the administration of it, like Capri just said, and yeah. Okay, hearing no other thoughts, I will keep moving. So we have another choice to make at the bottom of the same page here. So this is the fiscal sponsor section. Fiscal sponsorship will remain the requirement for individuals who do not hold 501c3 nonprofit status. And so the changes in the black text here are just clarity in the language and description there. And then at the bottom are the different ways that we discussed last month, feels like a year, handling the fiscal sponsor fees, the administrative fee, the administrative support costs. So what you see here are three things shown on the screen. So option one in the red text, that is currently what we have right now. That is when an artist applicant and their fiscal sponsor negotiate and decide on their own if there will be an administrative fee that the fiscal sponsor charges. Could be 0, could be up to 10%. And typically, that would come out of the artist's budget. So the artist is responsible for payment of that fee. So option one is no change. Option two is that Metro Arts will provide fiscal sponsors $750 for administrative support costs. This amount will be allocated in addition to the approved grant amount. For example, if the approved project budget is $15,000, the total grant will be $15,750. Applicants that hold 501c3 nonprofit status and therefore do not utilize a fiscal sponsor are not eligible to receive this administrative support cost. So that is just standardizing it. On the administrative side, that would just be the same $750 to every fiscal sponsor. That is, recognizing the administrative tasks that come with that the organization is agreeing to take on. And that would be, the same for every project. Option 3, as we have it written here, is to not use a flat dollar amount, but to use a percent amount. So Metro Arts will provide fiscal sponsors 5% of the approved grant amount for administrative costs. This amount will be allocated in addition to the approved grant amount. For example, if the approved project budget is $15,000, the total grant will be $15,750. So in that example that I gave, 5% and the $750 is the same actual dollar amount, but the amount would be different if the grant size is different. My recommendation for this one is option 2, just to standardize it, because the tasks are the same, whether the grant amount is $15,000 or $12,000. What the fiscal sponsor is being asked to do is doesn't really change on that. And just for clarification, this is not like a separate grant or anything. It's just on top. It's not 2 different contracts for this fiscal sponsor. And the main difference on the artist side here is that this is, as it's stated, right, above and on top of the grant. So in the current option, those fees are coming out of the artist budget. So we saw that when we were reviewing grant spending plans. It might say $1,000 for the fiscal sponsor fee. So that was coming out of the award size going to the applicant. So this is the choice that I am bringing you here.
And to just a couple of clarifications, this is per award. So if we had a fiscal sponsor who took on several, they would be provided they would be provided $750 per award that they were managing?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
And then my brain just went away. As we talked about last time, I am in support of the standardization of it and to have it not part of the artist's budget, and also to remove the negotiation of it, the burden of that on the artist to negotiate that with. I think this just makes it much simpler. And so I too would say that I am in favor of option 2.
And I was just doing a little math on my phone, if you're wondering what I was doing. I can bring this number to commission next week. I meant to bring it today, and I don't have it on me now, but the total amount that was spent is the right word, but that was the total amount in fiscal sponsor fees this year is roughly on par with what this 750 would be if I applied the 750 to the 75 projects that we have this year. And so I think this just evenly distributes it. And like Commissioner said, just takes that off of the responsibility or the burden of having to do that as part of the application.
Can the organization still elect to not receive that fee? You can't make anyone take money, but
I don't see why not. I would, just clear that during our review process, but I don't think we can compel anybody to take money. Yeah.
If I had to venture a guess, though, it would be that most people chose not to take the fee specifically so it wasn't a hindrance to the artist, not necessarily because they weren't working for it, so.
And again, some organizations said, like, when I asked them, what do you think of this process that we're using, who weren't serving as fiscal sponsors, or what would make you feel comfortable? I don't know if having support was one of the answers that was given, right? So, yeah, I mean, we know the situation that we are in, like, we would not be able to administer the majority of these Thrive grants without fiscal sponsors, and so this recognizes that as well.
Well, I guess option 2 does take the negotiation aspect off the table and makes it easier for the artist, but it also takes any pressure the 501c3 might feel about trying to help an artist off the table too, and just allows them to take the money for the work they're doing without second guessing it, so.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. So if we flip to page 7, eligible expenses, I added some language here around the list of eligible expenses, including a bit of a catch-all. Before, all it said was eligible expenses are artist fees and project or program supplies, and so I added these other things in there: marketing, promotion, performance, venue, facility fees, equipment rental, costs related to community activities, and the catch-all of other costs directly related to the proposed project or program. Funds cannot be used for the list as here. This is where I need to remove the language again around excluding payments to PAC or CARE committee members. Metro Arts Commissioners will remain on the list of you all cannot be paid from operating or Thrive grants because you are a commissioner, but we are removing that for community members serving on these 2 committees so that they will be eligible to receive Thrive funds. They just will not be eligible to participate in the decision-making around the authorization of those funds.
So to be clear, that bullet point, the last part, the Metro Arts Commission will remain, but then that payments to equity will be struck, as in the other. Cool.
Yep. These other bullet points that are added in here around Thrive funds cannot be used for general operating expenses of an organization. And so again, that's really just like distinguishing, like Capri said, not blurring the lines between the 2 different grants and their purpose: capital improvement, real property, reduction of debts, political lobbying, or activities of religious intent, study, or practices. And so those come from language in the operating grants as well. All right, so we're on to the grant cycle timeframe. The note around the clarity on the start date, hearing no objections, I will use that same as we've used in operating. How to submit an application, the application deadline, the checklist, that is all the same as operating. The dates are the same as operating. We're able to process these on the same timelines. Funding determination, this includes the same language as that short 3-day correction period, which is new. Scoring and funding formula, I'm on page 9. Yep, page 9 there. This is the same as this past cycle. So applicants may request up to $15,000, and funding will be allocated based on a panel score and available funding. Funding will be allocated as follows. Applications will be scored and ranked from highest to lowest. I don't think this line belongs here. It says only those scoring 70 or higher will be eligible for funding. I'm recommending that you remove that from that sentence. That belongs in the operating one. And so this is the funding formula. This is once applications are scored, rank ordered, highest to lowest. Funding will be distributed in rank order, highest application or highest scoring applications until funding has been used and depleted. In case of tied scores, if there are not enough remaining funds to support applications with tied scores, 2 Metro Arts staff members who were not involved in the grant process will conduct a second review of the tied applications, create a new ranking based on that review, and then distribute funds based on secondary ranking. So that is not different from this year. And so the funding formula is the same process that we used this year. Funding approval is the same. Award notification, that is the same as operating. This is, just standard staff duties here. When we get to midpoint check-in, I will write a note to change that to grant check-in, as we talked about on operating. Final closeout report, same comments from previously apply here as well. Moves us on to logo and credit policy, maintaining good standing, monitoring. Really, the only difference throughout here is noting that, fiscal sponsors should ensure that that the reporting is submitted by appropriate dates. And that is both the fiscal sponsor's responsibility along with the artist's responsibility. And that moves us through the end of page 12. One change, so if we look at the rubric now on page 13, we made a change here. So the change here is that there is an additional question that's been added. So in the current cycle, it was 3 questions. One was, what is the project or program that is being supported? And then what is the timeline and what is the budget? And so the second question on the page here is a new addition. So it reads, what communities will be served by this project and how will you involve community members in the project planning, decision-making, and or art making? That comes from the language at the beginning of the packet here around what Thrive projects are, the intent here. And so knowing that Thrive is really about engaging, at the grassroots level, community members in these artistic projects and processes. And so we decided to just add an additional question here and to make it a 4-point question, similar to how the first question is a 4-point question. So this just makes the Thrive application out of a total of 11 points instead of 7 points. I think that it's not a huge add on the front end, and it just gives the panelists more information for the applicants to really show what their plans are. And so there's other little tweaks in the language on the rubric there, but otherwise the other questions are structurally the same. And similar to as on the operating rubric, this has a question for if you're a first-time applicant or an applicant that has not received a Metro Arts Thrive grant, is there anything else that you would like the reviewers to know about your work?
And that's new for Thrive as well.
Yep.
Cool.
So just to sort of recap the edits that we've discussed here are removing the prohibition on PAC and CARE members from applying for funding or receiving support, to take option 1 around dual eligibility, that organizations must apply to operating or thrive, but not both. To use option 2 in the fiscal sponsor administrative support cost to provide a flat $750 administrative support cost to the fiscal sponsor. Again, on page 7, to remove the prohibition of PAC or CARE members being paid through Thrive projects. To add clarity on the start date, which would be the date that the contract is signed by all parties. To remove the inclusion of a 70 minimum score for being eligible for funding, because that is just a different funding formula. And to change midpoint check-in to grant check-in. Those are the changes that we have talked about. And I'll, take any motions or further discussion and questions.
Questions or discussions? I think we've had some good discussion as we went along for this, which has been helpful. I did write all this down, so I can articulate a motion, or we can. I'll go ahead and try to articulate a motion. How about that?
What Ashley
What?
said.
Or we could just say what Ashley said.
No, just take just a little bit more time and remind me of the removing of the inclusion of 70 as a score. It's right here. Only those scoring 70 or higher will be eligible. You're saying?
That is language that went with the operating grant, but because of the way that the scoring is done, it's just rank. So it's
Gotcha.
just not applicable.
I can go ahead and read this then. I'll make a motion to recommend Thrive Project grant criteria and guidelines with all recommended changes, including that organizations cannot receive both operating and Thrive awards. The arts will provide a fiscal sponsor with a flat $750 for admin costs in addition to the grant amount. That grant check-in will be changed that grant midpoint will be changed to grant check-in. That we would remove the prohibition of PAC and CARE members, and that we offer clarity to the start date, and that we remove the inclusion of 70 or higher to be eligible in the scoring funding formula.
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Yes. Opposed? Abstaining? Great. Great motion. Summary. Thank you to the staff and Ashley for making this clear to us. The use of color coding is much appreciated.
Color code.
Yes, go ahead.
So there is one thing that I omitted from including on the FY26 materials. So you're not gonna take a vote onto whether you recommend this or not, but I'm still gonna tell you about what you have in front of you. And that last thing, we're almost done, is the grant panelist criteria. So these are our community members who will apply to be a grant reviewer. And so we have criteria and things that would prohibit community members from serving as a grant panelist to review as well, which will be part of the packet next week for the commission to consider. So this is the Metro Arts FY26 grant panelist criteria is the title of this document. So the first two paragraphs at the top there just describe what it is that we are looking for people to provide scores, to review applications, and that we are really looking for individuals who are thoughtful, willing to listen to others' opinions, able to represent viewpoints that are relevant to these funding programs, and that we're also looking for a diverse variety of experiences, backgrounds, perspectives, artist genres, and involvement with the arts. And so the specific eligibility of what we'll be looking for when people submit their applications are as follows. So all panelists must meet each one of these: be at least 18 years of age, be a resident of Nashville and Davidson County, have a keen interest in the arts, which we say could be as a working artist, a participant, an audience member, an advocate, an educator, etc. Must have a basic understanding or previous experience in grant making or previous grant panel experience. Must complete the application in full and must be available and committed to attend the orientation, to independently complete their assigned application review, and to attend an in-person review panel. So when we put the call out, we'll have all of those dates. So you're just seeing the criteria, you're not seeing like the whole package. And then I have a section that is titled Ineligibility and Conflicts of Interest. And so those are as follows. Metro employees or employees of Metro Nashville Public Schools are not eligible to apply. Elected officials of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville or the school board are not eligible to apply. Members of this commission, of the Public Art Committee or the Care Committee are not eligible to apply. And their family or immediate household members are also not eligible to apply. Individuals who are seeking Metro Arts grant funding are not eligible to be a reviewer of said grants. And individuals who are employees of or have a business or financial relationship with any individuals or organizations applying for funding are not eligible to apply. So this is really about trying to identify conflicts of interest on the front end, because we have to be very mindful of conflicts as they come up in the scoring process. So those are the basic eligibility criteria and things that are not allowed. And then the last page on this is the review selection criteria. So these are the 3 questions that will be asked to panelists or to community members who apply to be a panelist. This is really intended for not public dissemination, so I won't read them out loud. This is what will be reviewed when people are selected. So this is the rubric that's used there, and these questions are the same ones that were used in this current cycle. So we're not changing the rubric for panelists. So this is for your information. I'm not asking for a recommendation. It was not on the agenda as such, but it will be part of the packet for the full commission to consider next week. Questions?
That's great.
The last thing, sorry,
No, go ahead.
do you want to move us to the next agenda item?
Let's move to FY26 timeline review, my favorite.
Great. So the timeline that is shown on the screen as well as on your table before you, I could have taken off March 19, 2022, March 30th. We are moving along. We're down to June 16th. Here we are in the grants committee. So you made the guideline recommendations. We'll bring those for commission next week. And so what I'm going to do is make these edits as we discussed and send them over for their final legal review, which they're pretty simple edits that we've talked about. And so I will I think I can say that we'll have this information to commission on Monday. Is something that I will check because it has to go through the review process. But I know that commissioners need, we always try for the 2 full days before the meeting, but we'll do our best to get the packet on Monday, if not Tuesday next week. So immediately following the commission next week, assuming that the commission advances the approval of the guidelines and criteria, we have council legislation filing deadlines the Monday thereafter. And so we'll be working with Tessa and legal to make sure that we do what's needed to meet those finance, legal, and council filing deadlines. I omitted to include here, this is just for your information, on July the 1st, there's a council meeting that evening. I'll be providing an informational update to the Apple committee so that they'll be hearing from me 2 weeks before they are asked to vote on the criteria, so that if people have questions, it gives me time to make sure that council members are aware of what they're being asked to vote on, comfortable with it, and that I'm able to answer any of their questions instead of just going before them the day that they're supposed to vote. So that'll be happening on July the 1st. I've omitted that from the timeline here. But July 15th is what we will be looking at for approval by the Metro Council. And the reason that we're not seeking approval on July the 1st is just that those filing deadlines are long past at that point. So assuming that we receive council approval on July the 15th, we will look to open applications the following day. So we'll put that work in on the front end to make sure that things are ready to go. I've added when we anticipate opening our call for grant review panelists. When we looked at the timeline, and I will say we have a much more, a very detailed sort of internal work plan and timeline that I did not print for you all, but if you would like to see the greater detail, I can follow up with you one-on-one. But we anticipate putting the call for grant review panelists out July the 28th to August the 13th. And then we anticipate notifying selected grant reviewers on August the 22nd. We'll do technical review in between there. We have that correction period. I decided to call it a correction period instead of a curing period. It just sounds more normal. And then we will have our grant review panel period from September the 2nd to September the 12th. We are planning to do a virtual panel orientation. Independent review is what the panelists do on their own time, in their own homes or wherever, and then in-person panels, one day for Thrive, one day for operating, just based on the feedback that people gave us that the online worked and it was fine, but it would be, more enjoyable to be sort of in the room together. So we're planning on doing in-person panels. These dates for commission approval for allocation in September through the invoicing and payment processing is the same as before. So it's September where the conversation will be had of what do we allocate to Thrive, what do we allocate to operating, and then how do we allocate the operating dollars within the framework. So that's when that conversation will happen. And then I just added a few additional details here. And so roughly January through March, implement that monitoring plan, that check-in plan. The end of the spending period would be June the 30th of 2026 and close out June the 15th of 2026. So that's the very high level timeline here. We have a lot more details if you want a lot more details, but that is what we've prepared for you now.
That's great. Very helpful. Questions about the timeline as shared? Great. Is there any new business that we need to cover? That was helpful. That was my only question, was about next week and the materials that will go out. And yes. New business? Commissioner Jester, new business? Okay. Guess what? It's 2:31. And if there's not anything else, I think I can't ever remember how we adjourn, but I just say it, right? Move to adjourn, or we just leave? Move to adjourn. Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.